Hello and welcome to the third half, where we explore people, planet and progress through conversations about the systems we build and how they shape us. I'm Scott Hamilton and today's guest is Chris Brocklesby, someone who has spent his career leading technology in organisations millions of us depend on, and is now Chief Technology Officer at the British Heart Foundation, one of the UK's most prominent charities. Why am I excited about this is that Chris has a very interesting perspective of managing challenge while operating at this level, and I think that changes how we see work, responsibility and what actually matters. Chris, welcome to the third half. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Scott. Nice to see you.
I say that, how are you? And just for our listeners, watchers, or whatever, but we're going to do this a couple of weeks ago, and you couldn't do it because you were otherwise engaged.
Yes, I was planning to be on holiday, but unfortunately my holiday location changed from Portugal to NW3, namely the Royal Free Hospital, after I suffered from a kidney infection. So I had 4 days lying in a hospital bed being pumped through with antibiotics, but all well now, thanks very much.
And how did the food compare to that which you possibly would have been having in Portugal?
How does it compare? Well,
the food.
Well, the food has improved. I know the Royal Free Hospital very well. The food has improved. I actually put on weight while I was in the Royal Free, because obviously you're laying pretty stationary on a bed, being fed three meals, and of course being also having chocolates and salty snacks available 24 hours a day. So I actually came out heavier than I went in. So I can't complain.
You can't complain. Good for you, and I'm glad that you're back up and fit and healthy. But listen, I do want to come back and touch on this topic about health and leadership and challenges that come up. I touched on it briefly in my introduction there, but excuse me, and I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. I think we're starting to, but I don't think we talk about it enough. So let's part of that and come back to it. So listen, we've known each other for a long time, 20 plus years, but for listeners who perhaps don't know your story, why don't you give us the short version of the journey so far?
CV. I'll try.
CV.
So I learned my trade at Accenture, or started with Arthur Andersen, as it was back a million years ago. So specialised there in kind of big program delivery, ended up being partner in financial services practice, where we bumped into one another, particularly around insurance. And after I left there, I've done a series of CIO jobs, I suppose, is the very simple CV, which is being the CIO or IT director at Tesco, Tesco.com, Tesco Bank up in Edinburgh, and then EasyJet, Vodafone, where else have I been? Dunelm, Post Office, and now, as you said in your introduction, British Heart Foundation. So first time as a run out in the not-for-profit sector.
So thank you for that. And when I think back to, I mean, we're run about the same age, and I think about when I left university back in the whatever it was 80s. The tech industry was booming, and it was one of those things that even if you didn't do a degree or a qualification in technology, a lot of people get drawn into technology, like it was just that kind of like boom period from a recruitment perspective. And maybe I was just a bit lazy that I didn't want to go to too many interviews or do the milk run enough. But what originally drew you into technology? And when you started your career, did you imagine you'd end up running systems that millions of people rely on?
No, not really. It was, I suppose one of the ways of responding in a slightly negative way, which I did chemical engineering at university. But the mistake I made is, after I was sponsored by ICI, and as a consequence of being sponsored, I did a year after I left school in the Rock Savage Chemical Works up in Runcorn, as an 18-year-old, living in the YMCA. And I can tell you, as someone who went to public school, living in the YMCA in Runcorn, Newtown, was something of a rude awakening. And then spending, 10 hours a day on rock savage chemical works, literally wading through mercury, and or being gassed by hydrofluoric acid. By the time I got to university, I pretty much had already concluded that I didn't want to be a chemical engineer. But as ICI were actually paying me a handsome amount of money to actually turn up and drink beer, I thought, well, why not continue as we are for 3 years? I mean, clearly I was kind of numerate, and so the idea of doing something associated with, kind of my degree was attractive. Quite frankly, the money was good. There's no point in dodging that. But also, I mean, it wasn't necessarily the technology, but the kind of consulting, having the variety of going around and working for different clients with different challenges in different places around the world, sounding quite sexy at the time, as a whatever it was, 20-year-old. So I think I probably fell into it a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah.
I didn't have some kind of burning passion to change the world through technology at the age of 20. I thought this seems like a pretty cool job. They're going to pay me quite well and send me around the world to do it. So why not?
So that's really funny because like I get sponsored in my degree through ICL.
Right,
So
yeah.
pretty close. And like you, I thought, well, if they're paying me to drink, or well, if they're putting a few beers in me, then I feel obliged to go back and spend a few years in it. But I didn't do what you did and managed to get out. I just kept working in tech for the rest of my life. So quick, interesting, and this point about when you were working in Accenture, so 18 years in Accenture, which was
Yeah.
that kind of, I'll say formative years, but that's a long formative period. What did that teach you about organisations themselves and large organisations in particular? And if I think back to that time in Accenture and Anderson's before actually,
Yeah.
what a period of growth that was from Arthur Anderson through the early part of Accenture and then what it has now become.
Yeah, I guess it taught me, I think, the power of the network and the power of personal relationships. There's all the technical stuff, which is, you learn the trade, you learn initially coding and testing and project management and program management and how to run all of those things. And that's kind of a given. But I guess, as a consultant, learning how to develop personal relationships with clients and internally to some extent but most importantly with clients, with people that are, from a very different background, with a very different perspective, flexing your style. My first job was at the DSS in Long Benton in Newcastle. A bunch of hardcore Geordie civil servants. Now, I had to learn how, I was flying up on British Airways from London on a Monday morning. It's a pretty hostile environment,
Yeah.
but you're learning how to deal with people. You're learning how to build their trust. You're learning how to try and dispel some of the stereotypes that they had about you. And I think that's just hugely important, and that stood me in such good stead for the rest of my career. And that's aside from all the kind of technical stuff, which is, it is a given as part of the role.
And I think that's still, actually, I end up talking about this a lot on the third half with people from all different walks of life about this need to network.
Yeah.
This need to engage with people. Life's not a bed of roses where everybody we work with, we get on with. And it doesn't need to be so, but we
No.
need to find a way to work with them. And I worry, I don't worry, but I reflect a lot on the more remote nature of work now with the younger generation. Our kids are not, are around about the same age group, and
Yeah.
are they getting the same learning as what we did when we started out?
No, not at all. No, I'm passionate about making sure that we develop those relationships. And I think, it is interesting because, I always thought I was an extrovert. Because, I was quite comfortable on a big stage and giving presentations and all of that stuff. And many, many years ago, I got some personal coaching while I was at Tesco. And I said, I'm an extrovert because I'm quite, outgoing and I like to talk to people. And I said, really? So let me give you a scenario. So you go home tonight and your wife says, we're going out for dinner with a load of people that you've never met before. What's your reaction? I said, well, it's very clear what my action is. I'm going to do everything within my power to avoid going out. It sounds like my worst possible nightmare. I do not want to meet a load of people that I've never met before. And she said, you're a fairly extreme introvert. All you've done is you've learned to process, to prepare well and execute well on a presentation. That's just going through a process. That's just like, you're working in a factory and you're just working through a process. Think about what you want to say, write it down in a bunch of slides, stand up, speak to the slides, sit down again. That's not being an extrovert. And it kind of made me sit back a little bit and think, no, I'm not good. I'm not natural with people. So it is a little bit of a process for me. I'm okay one-to-one. But that's in my best moment is when I'm developing relationships with people kind of over a beer, one to one, but not on a on scale when I'm in control of the process.
Do you know, that's fascinating, because, and I hadn't really thought about this, but my wife said to me, if we go into a room, like it could be a function, it could be a party or whatever, and we don't know anybody, she'll be the one that will work the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas I'll make a beeline for the one or two people that I know, even remotely, and I'll stick. Whereas Katie will go into, and at the end of the night she'll say, "How many new people did you meet?" Or not it's some sort of competition, but who did you talk to tonight? And I'll say, "Oh, I talked to Chris."
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, you only talked to him last week, so like, well, who is he?" And I would say, "Well, actually, I didn't talk to anybody else."
Yeah.
And I always, like you, I always think of myself as being a bit of an extrovert, and I hadn't really thought about it like that. Gosh, isn't that strange? So listen, just changing tack a little bit. So in your introduction, you talked about the work you've done and some of the kind of the large organisations you've worked on, which basically means you've spent your career running systems that people rely on almost every day. What do people misunderstand at times about running large operational systems, and what have you learned about doing that over the years?
Well, I guess one of the kind of personal response is that you're never off. You're never off. It's I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but it is 24/7. It is 365. I've had lots of and people don't really. I don't think really people appreciate that when you are with people, and kind of you're out for dinner on a Saturday night, and someone says, "Stop looking at your bloody phone." Yeah. And you're like, well, I can't. Right? There's an incident. The website's down. Right? So this is me at work, because actually, if in half an hour it's not back up again, I'm going to be leaving the restaurant, right? And I think so you're always on. I've had my phone. We all have our phones next to our bed, but you know what I mean. My phone is next to my bed on the bedside table, ready to go off, and it has been like that for 30 years. Now you get to, I don't get called very often, and I don't want to overplay my hand on this. They're thinking that I'm kind of wandering around constantly, not relaxing and looking at my phone at a football match or whatever. It isn't like that. But I think, when you are running infrastructure, it is, 24/7. That, when I was at Tesco, it always struck me that Christmas Day was a busy day, right? Because, they're open on Boxing Day, right? So those the four sods, all the delivery drivers, they're all working on Christmas Day. The people in the distribution centres are working because they're loading the trucks up that are going to go out Boxing Day morning, so that when go into a Tesco shop on Boxing Day morning, there's fresh milk, right? And there's a fresh sandwich and all of that stuff. And so that's just one personal aspect to it, is that, it really is. And I've got so many examples of, being interrupted over the years. There's always a famous one where I was going to a gig just before Christmas at Camden Palace, as it was back then, with my then 16-year-old daughter, and it was a busy time, obviously on the Tesco website. I was Tesco.com CIO then, and of course the website had crashed. So I'm there kind of a few beers into the evening watching some rock band in Camden Palace, and I had to, I told my wife I was going to leave my 16-year-old daughter and go back to work. She wasn't very happy with that, so I had to bundle her into a taxi and put her home, and then and go back to work. But there's that aspect. But that's the personal aspect. I think it's the obsession with the customer experience, right? You've got to be, customer experience is everything. The first question when there's an incident, there's a problem, is how does it impact customers? So you've got to have, again, it's a little bit of a cliche, but I don't care about a server number. I don't care about a network. I don't care about a website. I don't care. What is the customer experience? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it different? What's the customer impact is always the first question. And I think there's quite a lot of people that work for me over the time that don't quite get that. When someone does call me, and I don't really care what the server number is. It's like, what's actually happening to the customer experience? You then have to be obsessive about measuring availability, understanding it, and then building resilience into systems. Not very popular, right? So, a board doesn't really want to know about how much money you need to spend on building, a secondary stack into a secondary data center that you can fall over to. It's incredibly dull. They ask you, when is it going to be used? And if you give the honest answer, which is probably never, but possibly once every few years, it's not a very good answer compared to sexy new product or feature, which is going to generate revenue. So resilience is key, but most importantly, testing resilience. You wouldn't believe the number of organizations that have built supposedly resilient systems. You walk in the door in a new job and you say, when's the last time it was tested? 5, 6 years ago, maybe never. Well, why haven't you tested it? Well, we're worried about the impact on the business if we test it and it doesn't work. Well, just a minute. If you're worried about it not working, that means when we're in the crap and we need it, it's highly likely not to work. So you're basically saying that it's not resilient in the first place. So it's that kind of being the unpopular one that's saying we need to be obsessed by resilience. We need to be sure that it is actually fit for purpose and actually is going to operate as designed, rather than assuming it's going to operate as designed and then find out when you need it, it's not there for you. So that's some of the things that you need to be obsessed about.
So thank you for that. And I remember you said something there that has just clicked a memory with me. I think after you left Accenture, one of the first times I came to see, I think, was it up Welland or up in Hertfordshire somewhere? And I think you might have you were either working for Tesco Bank or Tesco.com, I can't remember. And you told me this really interesting, I'll say funny story about how, and I might get this wrong, but it was the big five. There was always 5 fruit or vegetables that were on discount, right?
Yeah,
and I might be getting this. Yeah, no. and you were saying to me about, I need to know what the big 5 is, and I said, are you joking? Because you had just left the insurance industry and Accenture. I was, are you joking? And you said, Scott, Terry Leahy, who I think was chairman at the time, expects everybody to know that in the business. And I was like, wow. And I think that's where, to this point about the customer and the customer experience, we have to obsess about it.
Yeah, and I think retail's great for that. And there's all sorts of reasons why it's a kind of stressful place to be. But because it's so tangible and real, at Tesco's, where you had this kind of slightly infamous 7:30 on a Tuesday morning meeting. But, the retailers are, there's this whole thing about retail is detail. But, before that meeting, store directors had often been into a number of their stores every morning, right? And they come back with a list saying, there's there's no spuds in Welwyn Garden City. Leaks are out in Hatfield. And it's that, and then there'd be a whole kind of, there'd be a whole kind of 10-minute, 15-minute conversation is why the leaks are out in Hatfield.
Yeah.
People running around and looking at various systems and deciding it was because there was a failed delivery or because there was a leak supplier had let them down. But yeah, I mean, that's why it's fun, because it's tangible. And real. That's why it's hard, because it is so when things go wrong, it's so obvious that things are going wrong. You can't avoid the fact that there is a gap on the shelf. Right?
100%. Yeah, there's a glut in leaks, and again, this is interesting. Going back to your Accenture experience of being a consultant and organisational change, which we talk about a lot. I'm having 35 years down track. I think, when systems fail, yes, sure, sometimes it's technology, but sometimes it's organizational or process and everything like that, and working in some of these kind of fast moving, critical industries, has your perspective on that changed as well? And is it like, hey, it may be technology, it might not be, but we're all in here to just try and fix this?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, technology is so pervasive, isn't it? I mean, it underpins nearly every job that anyone does. But the cliche, of course, is people, process, and technology. I get that. That was the mantra at Accenture, wasn't it? Really, that we try and bring these things together to deliver a client solution. But it is so true that any given process has a massive human element to it, and so yeah, absolutely. Those meetings I just described in Tesco were exactly that. Is how the people, process, and technology come together to deliver a customer experience.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's talk a bit about British Heart Foundation.
Yeah.
And what drew you into that, because I remember like a few years back when we were talking about, is it semi-retirement, is it fractional, is it NED work, is it charity work, or whatever, and then you pinged me, or you pinged our group, and you said, get us gig at British Heart Foundation, and I was like, wow, what is that, a day a week? And you said, no, it's a proper role. So what drew you? Talk to us about British Heart Foundation and what drew you there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's a combination of exactly the same and completely different. Let me explain what I mean by that. Now, clearly completely different in as much that, the mission is everything. And again, if you're not careful, it does sound like a bit of a cliche, but unless you get the mission, our mission, to address, cardiovascular health in the UK, then, you're probably not going to want to join. And it is pervasive in the charity sector that people need to really get it and understand it. And it's important, it makes a difference. And so the mission is hugely important. In many respects, the same is that, we're the biggest charity retailer. So we've got 660 shops in the UK. So actually, when you look at the systems underpinning that, what we do, we run shops, we market our supporters, we run HR and finance, we do very similar things. So actually, the fact that there's a big transformation journey to be accomplished at BHF, a big investment in technology to drive fundraising, was a big part of the attraction. So this wasn't a kind of turn up and turn the handle and run the thing BAU. This was about help us to deliver a genuine technology-led transformation. So that was very familiar territory. But the difference is, when you look at the financial statement at the end of the month, as I was doing on Wednesday, the bottom line doesn't say profit and loss. The bottom line says funds available for research. And that really hits, it really means something. And it's interesting, having worked at the likes of Tesco and EasyJet, where you think that, well, indeed they were obsessed by cost control. They had to be in those incredibly low margin businesses. when you're looking at the end of the month and seeing funds available for research, you aren't squandering your money, right? It drives you to be passionate about cost control, about being careful about every pound and every shilling to make sure that, kind of that number at the bottom of the page is as as large as it possibly can be. And that's, it's a great place to work. And the research is made very tangible for us. We can go and visit some of the researchers in places like King's College Hospital, be overwhelmed by some of the things that they're working on, and some of the things. I don't have a big enough brain to even understand really some of the research projects when they are there in a lab, wearing their white coat and explaining how they are treating these cells and how they're trying to, they're creating heart cells from stem cells. That's just kind of day one as part of some of their projects. Even that blows my mind. But, it's an incredibly important mission. So, yeah, some things very similar and some things very different.
And it's fascinating. And does it change how you prioritize technology in that context overall? In terms of what's important and where you make your investment. So I get the whole kind of like, the cost dynamic changes and the outcome changes. Does the prioritization change?
Not so much, in as much that we are trying to drive, top line. Our top line, of course, is, kind of fundraising activity, marketing activity, legacies. So that's people giving some money in our wills, etc. So I think attitudinally that's the same. So how are we going to build a customer database? How are we going to market our supporters? How are we going to, there's some things that are a bit different. How are we going to run great events like, charity bike rides or marathon, etc., in order to generate, and maximize revenue. But the whole idea of maximizing our revenue, maximizing our top line, it is a very similar mindset, I think, to a commercial mindset. And I've been surprised, really, when you look certainly at my exec colleagues at BHF, there's a couple of us that are kind of lifetime charity people, but most people have come from a commercial background, so they're very commercially driven. It's quite. I thought the people I would be working with and working for would feel very different, but actually no. Although they may be driven by the mission, they're very commercially minded, very commercially switched on. And very similar to the types of colleagues I've had in any commercial organisation.
Interesting, and things like, I mean, you can't not pick up a bit of press. In fact, just press. I was going to say tech press, but the advancement of AI, agentic AI, what we're doing with all this technology, like 5-10 years ago, we'd have been talking about digitalisation, I'd be rolling digital, la 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 la. Do you find that you still engage in that, technology innovation aspect, or are you kind of, actually, all that's really interesting, but do we really need all that stuff when we're running systems for a charity?
No, I think it's very similar. I think there are, for AI in charity and certain medical charities, there's a bit of a fork in the road, right? So if you look at research itself, there's a huge application for AI. That's actually the most exciting aspect. Now, it's not something I get involved in because it's driven by particular researchers, particular grants. But, if you look at the way that they're, using AI to help design drugs, using AI to interpret results or various experiments, look at images of cells and interpret whether a particular drug has had the effects that's required, and all sorts of incredible stuff around AI, then that's having a massive difference. The time to market from a kind of an idea to a commercially available treatment is going to be absolutely transformed by AI. And we're in the foothills of that at the moment. Now, sadly, to some respects, that's not really part of my job because we let the researchers get on and do that. But actually, in our world of back in the BHF itself, then yes, it's the same conversation. I think where are the big business cases for us? Probably around customer service, about how we serve you as a supporter, as a customer, whether it be on the phone, on the web, whatever it might be. How we use AI to generate content. Digital content. I think these are all the kind of standard use cases that are emerging in other commercial organisations. So, I mean, as ever, we'll be very tight on our investment. We won't be kind of launching in and spending tens of millions of pounds on speculative investment. But we're out there, training all of our staff on Copilot and Copilot agents. We've got some, we think exciting use cases to apply to how to drive efficiency in the charity. So we're probably not spending and investing the same amount as a commercial organisation is, because we probably just don't have those funds available. But I think AI is as applicable in our world as it is in any other world.
So, listen, I think about this a lot in the charity sector, right? Because, as you know, I've done a lot of work with NSPCC over the years, for 20, 25 years now. Our mutual friend Trevor Hatton pulled me into it. And things like the NSPCC and BHF, I suspect as well, the brand is boring. And I say that in a provocative way because they're so well established, right? And there are other kind of sexier, cooler charities out there. And then, so point one. And then point two is, if you walk up the high street, there are 5 different charities all competing with each other for your stuff. So I think what's important for everybody to realise is that this is a really, really competitive sector, and it feels very strange using that term when talking about charities.
It's still awkward, isn't it?
Yeah.
We talk about our competitors being, cancer research, RNLI, kind of, we want to beat the cancer research UK, kind of, we've been growing faster than them. It's an uncomfortable, I'm still finding it an uncomfortable conversation. Now, of course, we obviously want the charity sector to succeed, but we kind of want our shop on the high street to be better than cancer research shop on the high street. And it is quite an uncomfortable concept, isn't it?
It's a very strange thing. And also, I mean, there's a lot less money in an ideal world. All these things would be getting funded somewhere by some entity that, let's spend money on cancer research and not war. Oh, political statement. I said I wouldn't do that. Yeah. But, there's people have less money in their pocket to put the pound in the pot on the street. People are recycling more of their own clothes and buying secondhand, less things to go into the shop. There's less funding from government, central, local, or otherwise. Yeah. So it is. I mean, it's a tough old gig, and actually the demand increases because I chatted to the deputy chief exec of UK Biobank last week, and he's very kindly agreed to come on the podcast at some point. And when I was listening to Mark, we were talking about how people are going to be living longer. Yes, we are going to delay the onslaught of some of these life-threatening diseases, but people will be living longer, and we have to cater for them through charity as much as anything else because the system can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And, there's all sorts of competitive threats for us in terms of, charity. Charity retail is tough, right? Kind of all those fixed costs are going up. Our average selling price, forgive me, I don't know the precise number, but I think it's something like £3.50, right? So, when your average selling price is £3.50 and your overheads are going up and escalating, whether it be national insurance contributions, whether it be, heating and lighting or business rates, you have to sell a lot of things at £3.50 to make profit. You've got, as you've already mentioned, at the top end of, kind of higher value items, you've got the likes of vintage and Depop and all the rest of it, where people are using because they can generate a bit of income for themselves rather than giving stuff away. And then just as big a threat for us and all the charity sector is all the kind of, the Chinese manufactured goods coming in, clothing coming in, Shein and all the rest of it. If we price a dress or a jumper, we typically would price it as something like 20% of its of its new retail price. But if you're buying a Shein dress at 15 quid or 12 quid, kind of how much, what are we pricing that at? We're pricing it at 2 quid,
Yeah.
right? So, it's a really, the retail part of our, not just our, but the retail part of charity retailing is really tough. But, we've got to find ways of being more efficient. We've got to find ways of using technology. We're using AI in our stores to do things like price suggestions, which has worked really well for us. You've got volunteers. I mean, I've worked in the shops a couple of times now, and you get all sorts of stuff coming in the door, and you're there as a volunteer. You're being asked to price up this stuff. Well, how the hell, M&S jumper, a book. No, it's very hard. But actually, AI, we can, we're going to get to a place where we can, books are easy because you can use AI to go out to the internet. You've got an ISBN number and look up what the stuff's selling for on eBay, etc. That's easy. But what we'll do with the M&S jumper more and more is do image recognition so that we can take a picture of it. It can get out there. The AI app can go out there and come back with a suggestion. So, I mean, that's just huge, a very practical example of how AI can help to get the price right first time, which is a huge part of the challenge.
Yeah, brilliant. And listen, I want to move on, but one of the things that, just to close off on this, was I remember the first time that we caught up after you had started there. You made a big shout out for the people there. I mean, you're clearly passionate about it, and I love that. But you did talk about everybody you've met in there, and their commitment to that mission and their passion was unparalleled in terms of your career.
Yeah, I think that's right. People really get it, but also I think it's broken a few stereotypes for me because look, the charity sector doesn't pay commercial rates, right? I think we try and pay above benchmark for the charity sector, but charity sector is below a commercial organisation for the same role. We don't pay bonuses, we don't pay LTIPs, right? Salary is the salary. So kind of people work there because they are passionate about the mission. They do get the mission. Also, they work there because you have to work really hard on benefits. So. There's always benefits packages in any place you work, but I think we're really good, and the charity sector in general is really good at, flexible working, adoption leave, paternity leave, working from abroad, whatever it might be. So it's a place where, kind of flexibility and those wider benefits are hugely important. And also, I'm probably going to be slightly reticent to raise it because given all the kind of slight backlash around DEI, the DEI actually does, I feel it really does mean something at British Heart Foundation. Everybody is genuinely welcome. I know it's another cliche, but somehow, all the usual stuff, which is alive and well in the BHF, which is networks and policies and, recruitment policies to make sure that we don't see the names and the pictures of anybody that's, CVs we see and all of that stuff. Yes, that is all alive and well. But when you take a step back, you just think, yeah, everybody is genuinely welcome here. So I think, that's the attraction. It attracts people who like to work in that kind of environment. But then I think what you're alluding to is that, you walk in, you think, well, these people earn slightly less than I'm used to working with. And, candidly, I'm earning less than I'm used to as well. Therefore, you're going to come across people that are less capable, less driven, less ambitious. And nothing could be further from the truth. Wow. And I'm incredibly impressed by the quality of the people that my colleagues are, amazing. They really are, there's not some kind of sense of kind of some sleepy charity where if you want a kind of easy life, go and work for a charity, go and work for the BHF, you'll be able to just coast along. Not true. These people are incredibly ambitious and fantastic at what they do.
Brilliant. I love to hear that, and I love the fact that you brought in the. I mean, DEI, as you say, cliche or otherwise, like it's much pilloried for a variety of horrible reasons, and I think it's so important that we keep talking about it and pushing it, and as you've just very clearly articulated there, demonstrated the value of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, love that. Okay, listen, I'm going to tread carefully in this one, but we've talked about this before, and I want to talk about health,
Yeah.
perspective, and leadership. And as you feel able to and willing to, let's talk about your own journey and how
Yeah.
that has influenced you in your leadership roles and your perspective.
Yes. Happy to do so, Scott. I mean, I'm fairly open, as you know. So my medical CV is quite a long one. I'll try and give you a summary of it. So, known most of my adult life that I've had a kidney disease, ended up in kidney failure, on dialysis, and had a kidney transplant from my amazing wife in 2010. Unfortunately, just after lockdown, somehow managed to contract TB. I've no idea how. Did for my third kidney, so ended up with a fourth kidney from my amazing brother-in-law in 2022. And then since then, although that went comparatively, very well, suffered from a number of quite nasty consequences and complications as a result of that that transplant. So I've been in and out of hospital since 2009 to today, where I was at the hospital at 8:30 this morning having a blood test. So yeah, I mean, look, so I'm well, and I'm incredibly thankful from the care I've got from the NHS, and clearly been very lucky to find two family members to offer up my third and fourth kidneys. So I sit before you as a proud owner of, well, am I an owner of four kidneys, or am I looking after two, and two are my own? I'm not really sure. But I think I probably own them now. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I suppose the reflections are, I mean, having to, benefiting from flexibility from employers. If I'd worked for people, and I've been particularly ill when at Tesco's first time around, flexibility is everything. So if you're in the kind of job and you've got the right boss who's kind of says, I expect you between 9 and 5, 9 and 6, Monday to Friday, that I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would not have been able to, kind of go on dialysis, go on, hospital appointments, say I'm not available for a particular meeting. So, the flexibility, I benefited from that. And that's made me also consider, how I turn up to work and deal with flexibility for the people that work for me. And it not just about, there's all sorts of needs, there's medical needs, but there's all sorts of needs, aren't there, in terms of childcare and everything. So flexibility really has allowed me to continue my career while dealing with stuff in the background. I guess the other thing I reflect on is what I've needed at work during that journey. And I know the stereotype that we all probably trot out is particularly about men and how they deal with this is that they shut down and they don't want to talk about it, and they're not very good, whether it be physical or mental health. And I do get that. I see that a bit in myself. But since our first conversation about this, Scott, I reflected on it a bit. And I think I've been very lucky because, let me backtrack a little bit. So when I was at Tesco and I was really ill, on dialysis is not much fun when you're trying to work full time. I told almost nobody at Tesco, right? I think there were probably 4 or 5 people in the whole of the organisation that knew that I was on dialysis and, on the brink of a transplant. And it's easy to look at that and go, typical man, didn't want to talk about it. But actually, my reflection is I did have a support network. I've got a big family. I've got some wonderful friends. And I could talk to, how I was struggling and what lay ahead with them. The last thing I wanted was to go to work and have the same conversation. Oh, well, I had a bad blood test yesterday, or not feeling very well, I'm slightly worried about whether I'm going to find a kidney. I didn't want that, and I didn't need that. I wanted people to just treat me as normal, to not constantly refer to the fact that I was ill, to talk to me about my job, and to allow me to feel normal at work as though I was adding value and getting on with things. And I just didn't need a lot of discussion and a lot of sympathy. And so it's just a counter, maybe, and everybody will be different. There'll be other people who desperately want to go to work, and have a support network around them and be able to open up, and be able to discuss these things. But that's exactly what I didn't want. And so I thought, it's worth reflecting on that, because everybody is differently. And when I think we just got to adapt to people's needs, obviously, to look out for them, to make sure that they're okay. But not everybody wants to talk about it the whole time,
So what do I think about that? So thank you for being very open. Well, question first off, would you do the same again today as you did back in Tesco Day? Would that kind of like, I'm not going to share it, I'm not going to be open, one or two people need to know, that's it, just treat me as if life is normal?
Yes, I would. There's a but coming. There's some aspects of me about that being, I think, trying to be a bit too male and a bit too heroic, and which actually, looking back, putting myself at risk. So what I did was I said, I'm not going to change anything. So if you need me to be in India next week, I'm going to go to India next week, right? And I'm going to have to self-dialyse in a hotel room in the middle of Bangalore. That was stupid, right? That was foolish, and that was putting myself at risk. So I was so far at the end of nothing to see here, right? That there was, now and again, I did things that were stupid. And those things I got away with it. I didn't end up, in a hotel room in Bangalore, on the floor, in kidney failure. But, so there's a few incidents like that. And I also went to the US. I took my dialysis machine. My dialysis machine broke down in New York, and I had to sit there and wait for, that's foolish. That's stupid. That's childish. That's not looking after yourself. But it's also putting stress on your family, particularly putting stress on my wife, who gets a message from me who says, I'm in a New York hotel room and my machine doesn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. So those things, that's extreme, and that's foolish. But the other stuff about not wanting to sit at work and talking about kidney failure, I would do that again.
And what do you expect of people that you work with, colleagues, people who work for you and stuff like that? Because again, you've got quite an interest, and I think quite different way. I find what you've just said there really, really interesting. Not what I expected. Would you expect the same, or would you just create an environment? If you want to talk about it, great. If you don't want to talk about it, great. What's your take on other people?
Yeah, I think it is exactly that, which is try and, if it's someone like, if I was trying to look after, manage someone like me, it's the flexibility in terms of how you're working that is desperately required. The hours, understand that people sometimes at short notice are going to be sick, not going to be able to do the thing that you want them to do. But it's also that flexibility in terms of style, isn't it? It's just kind of work out what people need from you as a manager. Mm. Do they need the kind of emotional support, or I think you do need to know that people have your back, right? You do need to know that. My boss understands what I'm going through, and therefore is going to give me some level of flexibility. Is going to be sympathetic, is going to help me through this. Of course, you need that. You don't want the kind of the the blank expression, the uncaring boss. You need that understanding, but you need to know that it's there, and you can, in my case, that it's there, and I will ask for it and seek help, guidance, support when I need it, rather than it being constantly offered. And that's what my reflection.
And I guess the thing is here that, and I don't want to overgeneralize about it, but it's the recognition that this happens, right? And people do contend with things like health, context, the environment they work in every day. And again, I genuinely, I could talk about this for hours actually, because I love this stuff, because this is the people aspect of work. We think that we too often think that people are automatons. We don't really think about why people do what they do, how they operate, how they function, the context, the environment in which they live. And that's real world. And I think maybe as we're getting to this point in our career, we probably think about it more because we go through more experiences than what we did. And part of my coaching and some of the stuff I do is to get back to, take this right back to, perhaps people that are starting out and say, well, why? Why are they doing this, and what is the environment in which they're working?
Nearly everybody's got something, haven't they?
Yeah, for sure.
At our age, they've got ill parents, they're dealing with grief. They've got ill children, they've got children with learning disabilities. They're going through a breakup, divorce. Everybody's got something.
There's a lot of stuff going on. Chris, this has been amazing. I could talk to you all afternoon. Final thoughts, little bit of advice to people who are coming through, who are thinking of going down this, tech leadership role. What's reflecting back on your years in go and work up Runcorn for a wee while, and then that.
Goodness, I'm not sure I'm that erudite to be able to. I mean, look, I think we've touched on some of it. I think it's all about the end customer, whatever form that, I've been very lucky that end customer is tangible, real in retail, right? But everyone's got some kind of end customer in technology. So, it is all about the end customer, their experience, the resilience of what you're looking after, what you're delivering. If you're obsessed by the customer experience, and Tesco really taught me that, then you're not going to go far wrong. If that's your first question, what does it feel like for customers? Then I don't think you're going to get far wrong, because you're not delivering. You're delivering an outcome. You're not delivering technology. And where I think I have seen people go wrong, something that's beautifully architected, right? And you've got the diagram, and you could talk about the technology, and it's using cool stuff under the covers, and it's beautifully designed. Inside the box, but doesn't deliver a great customer experience and doesn't deliver the business benefits that it set out to achieve, is a worthless piece of technology. So it's not about the technology, it's about what you're trying to deliver as a consequence. What was the business case in the first place? And if you're not delivering the business case, the fact that it's very pretty on the inside makes bugger all difference at the end of the day.
100%. Chris, listen, you've. I'm going to say you've had an amazing career. I think you're still having an amazing career.
Thank you.
Everything you talk about is incredible. You're working in these institutions, systems that millions and millions of people depend on, and I think what you're doing now at British Heart Foundation is just like right at the pinnacle of that. So, and a lot of people talk about give back. I'm giving back. I think you've found an extraordinary way to do a bit of give back here through BHF and through the work you're doing there. So big shout out for that. Thank you so much for joining us on the third half.
Can I ask one thing? And you may or may not put this in the final edit, Scott, but if you go to our website, bhf.org.uk, there's a 15-minute course that you can do called Reviver, which teaches you how to do CPR and teaches you how to use a defibrillator. And if you do, it's only 15 minutes of your time, and it might just save someone's life in the future. it's worth anybody's 15 minutes of anybody's time to do it.
Chris, that is in the final edit.
Thank you.
No doubt. Thank you so much. Have a
Cheers.
great day.